You know, it's not every day that you can sit with the commissioner of police anywhere. We realize the sacrifices that police, firefighters, and everyday sheriffs, the contributions that they make when they get up in the morning and leave. There's no guarantee that they're going to come back home to their families because they defend and make sure there's law and order in society. And we're so happy to have Mr. Ferguson, who is the Commissioner of Police in the Bahamas. You know, the Bahamas is becoming one of my favorite places, but recently you were on our syndicated XM show and you had some very profound things to say. You know, crime is the same no matter where it is, whether you're in the Bahamas or whether you're in the United States.
Well, that's quite so. Oftentimes when people ask me about, well, what's the crime situation in the Bahamas, I'd say, well, we have our share. We like everybody else. And of course, from my perspective, I prefer not to see a single crime. But of course, life being what it is. So, and as a policeman, as my profession, and the responsibility and the mandate that we have in the Bahamas to deal with crime situation, once it occurs, it is our responsibility to try to do the best that we can to deal with it. But of course, better still, take a proactive approach to it, to see what we can prevent. Because as you know, the Bahamas is a country that relies heavily on tourism, and you know, crime and tourism cannot coexist. And so it's incumbent upon us as a people, but especially as a police force, to try to do whatever we can to try to minimize crime as much as possible, because if we allow it to permeate our society or get out of control to any degree, it's going to affect our economy in a serious way. So that's my bread and butter, so you can understand the importance that we apply to fighting crime in our communities.
You know, when you look at the most egregious of crimes and the most heinous of crimes, you know, we have all these studies, we have all these conferences where people are trying to understand why certain crimes are committed. What is the one thing in your experiences, getting back to basics, that we've overlooked?
Well, in our society, the Bahamian society, I pin it to the social condition that exists. I think if you know the Bahamas, we were a former colonial territory, just been independent now for 36 years or so, since 1973. And I think a whole lot of what aggravated a colonial setting still is rather ingrained in that society. We still suffers from that kind of experience.
How could you still suffer from something almost 20 years later?
Well,
everybody suffers from something. Everybody has an experience.
I want you to understand something here now. I'm not trying to find an excuse for something, because even in this condition that exists right now, the economic situation that's worldwide, a lot of people are pointing to that and say that's why crime is happening. And I'm saying that's an excuse, and I'm not trying to find an excuse. But I'm saying that you have to face reality of what actually shaped the society, what shaped these people, and why they are what they are. The cultures and subcultures that existed that you still have to fight against to try to bring people up to a certain level of awareness to be able to rise above these situations and not have certain things happen.
Jews were almost exterminated by Hitler. They don't seem to be affected by it in a negative way. They're thriving. Why is it that some people can take it?
You can't say that. You cannot say that there's not negativity from that situation.
But it's just not they have abandoned their families. They're still in the household with their kids. 98% of their families has a mother and a father. Most of them are educated. Most of them do well in the financial markets. I mean, how can you ignore that example?
That's a fact. That's a fact. And let me show you something else about that. Certain societies had different experience,
values,
or even values, or were able to
Self-worth.
able to suck. They were allowed to, they were enabled to the point where they were able to practice those values. In some places, it didn't happen.
But you can look at families in the Bahamas, you can look at families in the United States that come from the worst of situations. Just because you're poor doesn't mean you have to have a dirty house. That's not a reason not to do it. But look, people overcome. We have examples of people overcoming every day from the worst of circumstances.
And I do not subscribe to that. I do not subscribe to that. But I'm saying, in spite of all that, it happens.
People make choices.
You have to make choices.
Yeah, you make a choice.
Yeah, true.
I choose to abide by principles and values, no matter what my circumstances are.
And I do so, but the other guy over there may not. Or he is not able to see it yet.
Everybody within them instinctively know right from wrong. I don't care if we've never thought. There's something that's inside of you. There's a force that tells you right from wrong. Now, whether you choose to embrace that, that's free will.
And the fact that the individual make a certain choice is dependent on some other things that you have no control over.
Like what?
Well, his experience, culture, the environment, the state of living at the time, or right now. These things impacts on the individual, and his choices has to do with that. You, my brother, who has been perhaps liberated from that kind of experience, you have a responsibility. I have a responsibility. That's why we're doing what we're doing now, to try to improve or help them to see, to help to bring them in the way, to show them these principles and values.
Let me tell you something.
Can be consistent.
Anybody can have a baby out of wedlock. That requires nothing. Anybody can pull a gun when they want to be big and bad and call themselves a man. That requires nothing. Anybody can lie and cheat and steal. That doesn't require much. But you know what requires something? The restraint, the discipline. To say no. No, I'm not going to have a child out of wedlock unless I can afford that child. No, I'm not going to abandon my children because I brought them in the world. That's my responsibility. No, I'm not going to steal just because I'm hungry, because I believe if I have integrity and honor, even in my suffering, I will win in the end.
Well,
why can't they make the difficult choice?
That's the noble approach.
It's not noble, it's common sense. It's what
it's common sense. But of course you find people who, in spite of all of that, they still make these bad choices.
And you know what?
That's human nature.
But the media reinforces it. Is that the people that we need to listen to? As if there's no. Why don't they show the examples of people who make the right choice? Why don't you use the examples of people who don't get involved in crime, who are not corrupt? Why can't we use them as models? Why do we always go back to the worst of society?
Well, my brother, listen. I've only just discovered your show, and I was thinking, you're different because
different.
Yeah, your show is different.
Because we believe in something?
Well,
that's not different. Well, that's the norm.
If you check media internationally, you would find for the most part, the bad things that would be highlighted most of the times is the bad news is being highlighted all across the place, and that's influencing the mind of those people down there who are less able to appreciate what you're talking about. You see, and that is part of what you, as a media man, a prominent media man, have a responsibility to help to change, to help instill these values and help to point in that direction that perhaps we can do better if we will practice these values and principles.
Well, it works since the beginning of time.
Certainly do. But in spite of all that, we find that people ignore us and we go away from it, even though we know that these things are what make us have a better life. So, you have a responsibility, I say again, in your capacity, in the media, to help to enlighten humanity. Not just Americans, but people everywhere.
Commissioner Ferguson, Commissioner of Police for the Bahamas, thank you for joining us for a provocative discussion.